What's up, nerds? It's Havoc, and today, I know it's been a long time since I've made a video. I apologize for that. And I'm kind of here to explain myself a little bit today. And as I'm doing so, in the background, I'm going to be running this game between Zizzy and Fergie, who are both super high-level ladder players. Zizzy in the north playing Wehrmacht, Fergie in the south playing U.S. forces. For those of you that don't know, Fergie, in addition to being an exceptional player, is actually working on contract with Relic as a balance consultant. So I thought this was interesting because it showed me in watching this game that there are players that are in the community that are also involved with Relic that know what the problems with the game are. They are not ignorant to what the issues are. Yet, the issues exist and continue to exist and have existed for a long time. And so I'm going to talk about my perspective on what those issues are. And try to explain a little bit better like how that's impacted and why that's impacted the cadence of making videos. So I'm going to jump into it. So, I mean, to start with an explanation as to why I'm not making videos, there's a combination of just personal circumstances and things related to the game. On the personal side, my family is growing, which is very exciting for me. And I started a new job earlier this year, which has consumed a lot more of my creative energy than my previous job did. And so I find myself having to be really motivated even to make videos like this that are very straightforward and to kind of just me talking to the camera while we've got gameplay footage in the background. So I know you guys have been asking for more, you've been expecting more. I've also been promising more, and I feel bad not making good on those promises until more recently. And I will continue to make videos. This is the first of a longer cadence of videos I'm going to make. I'm going to break down the trailer that was most recently released, but I felt like it was more important to release this first because it kind of sets the context for everything else that's going to come. So, starting with the gameplay. So, there have been some gameplay issues. And I would say, like, there isn't anything dramatically different about the gameplay as a result of Relic's balance patches over the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, maybe even longer. If anything, like, the balance has improved up until the most recent patch. I would say that's probably among the worst. But prior to that, the balance is actually quite good. What's problematic is the meta of how people play the game at the level that I play at. And you're going to see it start to unfold in the background of this footage that you're seeing as I'm kind of talking up of it. You're going to kind of see how the gameplay unfolds and how the game is played. And why, in short, it's become kind of uninteresting to me to make videos on. Because a lot of, if not all of, my games start to look like a variation of what you're going to see in this one. And it's pretty significantly impacted my motivation to continue to make videos. Because the games are just not as interesting. The opponents are not as interesting. And unfortunately, because it's not just me that feels this way, a lot of the interesting competition, from my perspective, has actually dropped off. Where I'm not the only one that's not playing anymore. It's a lot of people, especially in 1 vs 1. Especially, it's very difficult for me to get good games in 1 vs. So that's the short explanation as to why. Now I'm going to talk about what the design problems are, and I'm not going to talk about why Relic hasn't fixed them because obviously I don't know, but I'm going to have some hypotheses as to why. Leading with and starting with, like, I think that at this point we're 3 years into the development cycle of the game. And I've come to the conclusion that the fundamental problems that I'm going to talk about are actually by design. And the reason I think that is because it's been 3 years, and Relic is not ignorant to the things that I'm going to talk about. They either don't see them as problems, or they don't see them as big enough problems to actually do something about them. Because otherwise, why would the game be this way? It would either mean that, you know, they don't know how to do their jobs, which I really don't think is the case. I don't think that they're incompetent. Or it means that it is this way on purpose. Because this is how they made it to be. And we understand that, like, I'm happy that this game is different than previous titles, than the other titles. But I'm not happy with how it is right now. So I'm going to kind of explain myself in as much detail as possible and try to summarize the core issues that I can see. And talk about ways that I think that they could help fix them. So anyway, so that's kind of my perspective on the Relic's attitude towards the gameplay designs. Pivoting into some more detailed things, I mean, I'd like to talk like a little bit about how the design flaw carryovers from Company of Heroes 2, specifically like the call-in meta. So for those of you that haven't heard me talk about it, I've not been a fan of call-ins as long as they've existed. I believe that call-ins, in their nature, the way that they're applied in this game, which is that there is no tech restrictions on them. Now, over time, Relic has been introducing restrictions, or I guess penalties for not including or not using tech properly. But like the nature of call-ins is that they break fundamental RTS design, which is in RTSs you essentially have a few different categories of resources, and one of the more important ones that not a lot of people talk about is time. Call-ins break the resource allocation in several different ways. One, in that they are instantaneous, so there is no production time or units that are called onto the map. Two, they ignore tech requirements, which tech is a combination of resources that are invested to access higher tier units. That's how tech works generally. Yeses. And this game is no different. With each tech level, you have to account for the construction time of the tech that you are building, and then the resources that you have to pay for that tech structure, or you know, in this case, it could be like a technology that's part of a tech structure. Officer quarters is a good example. It costs you time and resources to get access to officer quarters. And call-ins break all of that because there is no tech requirement. Oh, that's a nice friendly Molotov there from Faragi. A little bit of fatigue coming in here with his micro. Anyway, there is so you've got tech that you have to pay for, and with call-ins you don't have to. You don't have to pay for tech, and you also don't have to wait for the unit that you're producing to enter the field because call-ins are instantaneous. And we learned these lessons in Company of Heroes 2, and when Relic finally fixed them, finally fixed the restrictions around tech for COH3, it ushered in this golden age of competitive integrity for Company of Heroes 2, where the games, I mean, the meta, I'd say the macro meta was fairly stale. There was usually a handful of, not battle groups, but at the time they were called commanders. They were a lot less diverse and a lot less unique. There was a lot more of them. But generally there was like the same 2 or 3 that were surfaced as like the strongest commanders in Company Heroes 2. But call-ins were fixed in that a lot of call-ins were moved into production buildings. or there was a tech requirement in order to access a call-in. And that didn't exist in COH3. It's kind of like they forgot that lesson for COH3. And from what I'm seeing, it's kind of like they're slowly rolling back on that decision, like one little change at a time. And the main ones that we've been seeing are combination of Relic over time moving units into tech structures. Namely, I'll give you some examples: the Crusader AA for UK forces, the Centaur for UK forces. Previously, these units were call-in units. They were not constructed units. And trying to think of another one. Panther, most recently. Panther was moved from a call-in unit to a constructible unit. Easy 8 for the Americans was a call-in unit that was moved to a constructible unit. And I think that's a good thing. That is definitely like a really, really good thing. And it needs to continue. But it's kind of like, why did we go through all this pain in the first place? You know what I mean? Like, we already learned this lesson the hard way. So why do we do that on purpose? Seemed like a strange design choice. And I don't know if it's like stubbornness, or they thought that they could do it better, or whatever the reason was. Not good enough, I think. Not a good enough reason, and strange that we kind of all had to kind of pay the price as a result in dealing in playing the game with them in the game for such a long time. It was pretty frustrating. So I'm glad that, you know, things are moving the direction that they are now, but it's kind of like, if we were right about that, it kind of makes me think that maybe, you know, we were probably right about some of these other things I'm going to talk about. And so the cadence at which some of these things are changed, I think, needs to happen quickly. So anyways, getting into the golden age of competitive play for COH2. What made COH2, in my perspective, you guys can have a different perspective. Maybe you didn't like COH2, that's completely fine. But for me, what made COH2 interesting to watch was a combination of things. One was the RNG factor. There was a lot more randomness in COH2. And from a competitive standpoint, that's not a good thing, right? Because randomness can compromise the competitive integrity of the game, where it's like the better player may not necessarily always win just due to the amount of randomness that there is. That's not necessarily a good thing. And I think they compensated for that pretty well in this game. There's still randomness, but it's not nearly as swingy or dramatic as it was in Company Heroes 2. And so I see that as like overall a good thing. But the other thing that made Company Heroes 2 most interesting was not necessarily the units that the players built and the compositions that they put together, but it was the way that units were used that made the game interesting to watch. You combine that with like some of the randomness elements, it was very exciting. And the numbers, when you look at, like, you guys go watch games on YouTube from competitive games, tournaments, whatever. You compare the numbers from COH2 to this game in 3, there was a lot more audience for 2. And I think that's fundamentally why. It's because the game was more interesting to watch, because it came down to players executing really well with the units that they had, and not so much what they built. And this game feels a lot different from that. It feels like there is a much higher dependence on what you build than how you use it. And if you don't think that's the case, I mean, you can kind of watch the gameplay that's unfolding like right before your eyes in this moment. Like, you've got one player who's just, you know, Control A, moving all of his units together, attack moving the same area. You've got another player who's using a combination of abilities and cover to drive back the other player. And this is kind of like what the gameplay has boiled down to. It's become a lot more about what I build than how I use it. And I'm not really a fan of that. I feel like that is that factor was the key differentiator between Company of Heroes as a franchise, as an RTS franchise, compared to other RTSs. Other RTSs, of course, there's a big emphasis on what you build, right? But in these games previously, it was almost entirely on how you used it, and to me, that's a lot more interesting. Probably should have. And so, you know, this is kind of the state that we're in with 3, and I think this is contributing largely to why the players aren't sticking around. The competitive players aren't sticking around, generally speaking. And we're not attracting nearly as much of an audience as we did for 2. I'd be interested to hear some, you know, other opinions on why this is the case. But like, from my perspective, it kind of boils down to that. It's that the game competitively at the highest level, this is how it's played now. And it's not interesting to watch. And it's certainly not interesting for me to play. Maybe for some people it is. Like players like Zizzy here, or Fergie, but you know, Fergie obviously is a little biased because it's actually his job. Get on the ladder and get games in and learn what people are doing so they can balance the game properly. But yeah, this is kind of where we're at. So I think, like, you know, one of the things I am imagining is a different challenge for Company of Heroes 3 is that there are a lot more units. There's also a lot more viable units. With the battle groups introducing a lot more unique units compared to COH3, there's obviously a lot of interactions that can be challenging to strike the right balance between. And it usually comes up, like, the community's not completely out of touch with some of these interactions. Like, I see posts or people asking questions all the time, or in coaching sessions that I do, people are like, I don't know how to deal with this unit as the faction that I play, or with the units that I play with. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, right? And in 2, it was a lot more intuitive because there was a lot more uniformity in how the units performed. Anyway, I'm kind of blending topics. I'll talk more about that later. But I'm imagining that's one of the challenges of 3. And then another challenge is like trying to prioritize what it is that they're going to really spend a lot of time, effort, and resources on fixing. Relic, obviously, being an independent studio now, separated from Sega pretty quickly after the release of Company of Heroes 3. They're in a bit of a weird situation now where they have to do the thing that is going to help generate them the most revenue so that they can continue, you know, building the game. They can continue paying their employees. They can pay the developers. And they have budget to continue not just, you know, iterating on this game, but making new ones. And it makes me think that some of the reasons why we're not seeing solutions to some of these problems that I'll talk about is because they've kind of deemed it, you know, unworthy of the resources it's going to take to fix the problem. Or again, you know, they just don't think that the things that I'm going to talk about are actual problems. So let me get into the meat of the problems now, because I've been yapping for 20 minutes and I haven't actually got into the meat of what the problems are from my perspective. So first of all, blobbing. This is like the most obvious one by far. Blobbing is quite difficult to punish in COH3 compared to other titles. In 2 specifically, there was a pretty significant difference between the way artillery units functioned in 2 versus how they function in 3. And it can be summarized as such. In 2, the explosive weapons, mortars, tank projectiles, rockets, artillery, a lot more lethal on direct hits than they are in COH3, but they didn't have nearly as large of an area of effect as they do in COH3. So the way that you can really think about it is in 3, the artillery units are generally more precise and deal much more consistent damage over a larger area than weapons do in COH2. In addition, they also deal a lot less damage compared to weapons from COH2 at the epicenter of the explosive. So mortars, you know, they're much more precise, but they deal a lot less damage than they did in 2. In 2, you could have a mortar land on the head of your squad and just kill the whole thing if it was precise enough. But a lot of the time, it would miss, it would scatter a little bit, you know, do a little bit of chip damage here and there. But in 3, mortars are very precise. They are, like, super on target. You can pretty much rely on the fact that if you call a barrage on a target, it's going to hit it over and over and over again. And so in 3, we basically rely on stacking consistent damage in order to deal meaningful economic impact to my opponent. And at a high level, what that looks like is this. My mortar can sit in a cover position. Sorry, my machine gun can sit in a cover position and receive damage from a mortar shell maybe 3 times, 4 times before I'm forced to retreat back to base. And when I do that, rather than having to pay for an additional model because it got killed by one of the mortar shells or something like that, the only real attrition I take is the time that it takes to heal the unit back to full health. And this gets exacerbated by the infantry survivability stacking in COH3. So I'll talk about another fundamental difference between COH2 and COH3. And again, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just going to describe how they're different, and then I'm going to describe where I see the problem specifically with 3. So in 3, there are various ways that survivability is layered onto infantry units in the game. One is, and probably the most recognizable and the most consistent one that we've seen from previous titles, is called received accuracy. And basically what this means is it's the multiplier by which the accuracy value of a unit is applied to or multiplied by in order to figure out and calculate from a small arms perspective, am I going to hit the target or am I going to miss it? So the more received accuracy bonuses a unit accumulates, the less likely you are to hit them with small arms. This is especially egregious for units like Panzer Grenadiers is a great example. Wehrmacht Panzer Grenadiers get 2 large received accuracy bonuses at Vet 1 and Vet 2. By Vet 2, and this is one of the units that comes up most consistently in my coaching sessions with lower elo players. It's like, how do I fight Panzer Grenadiers? I feel like they just run into me and blow me up with a bundle grenade or gun me down with what is that, rapid fire, whatever that ability is called, and I don't know what to do about them. And that's because they have stacking received accuracy bonuses that make them very hard to hit with small arms. So the coaching I generally give to those players is like, you can't use infantry against them. You have to use vehicles. You have to use explosive weapons. You have to use maybe machine guns if you're lucky, but honestly most machine guns, Panzer Grenadiers will just run through them and throw a bundle grenade and kill them. But yeah, like they become difficult to hit, let alone, you know, actually fight, because they have very large health pools. And that is the second layer of survivability that units have to deal with. When we're comparing Company Heroes 2 to 3, 2 was simple because every single infantryman had 80 health. in COH3. Every single model, whether it was a engineer unit or a Obersoldaten, Übermensch, you know, super Nazi or whatever, super soldier, Rangers, whatever. The best of the best elite units in Company of Heroes 2 to the lowest combat potential units all had the same health pool. In COH3, it's different. In COH3, they have a lot more variation in the health pool of the units. Case in point, Grenadiers have 80 health, just like all the infantry had in COH2. Generally speaking, other line units have closer to 100 health. Elite units have between 115 and 125 health, which is a huge margin of difference between line units and elites and super elites, or whatever you want to call them. Layering further on top of that, there are some factions that have access to health bonuses that are purchasable, like US Forces, for example, has survivability training that can be purchased for all of their infantry units and team weapons. Additionally, team weapons in COH3 also have health bonuses that they receive through veterancy, so survivability stacks further that way as well. And finally, after health pools, we also have damage reduction. In my opinion, probably the most egregious of survivability stacking factors. And the reason why is because when they originally made the game, they created unit interactions, health pools, received accuracy values, and they balanced the game that way primarily. Taking into account things like how many shots is it going to take from this weapon type to kill an infantryman from this unit. All of that was factored in. When you layer in damage reduction, it applies this blanket multiplier to all the damage that a unit will receive, so that a lot of those breakpoints of like how many shots does it take to kill a man of this squad, they're all broken because the multipliers change all of the receiving values of damage. And so what you end up with is some units like dramatically overperforming in terms of their survivability compared to others. And it creates these ridiculous dynamics between infantry units of, you know, what, like how to fight each one. It's not intuitive at all because of the variance in survivability from squad to squad across the game. In my opinion, the way to fix this is to truncate the survivability stacking. So, you know, bring down the received accuracy multipliers that units get from bonuses. Squeeze together the health pools of different infantry units. It's fine to have variation, but I think right now there's too much. There's too much variation. And then in addition to that, make damage reduction much more exclusive. We went from having like damage reduction on like 1 or 2 units into the game to like one from every level or one from every faction. And then it became like 1 in every battle group or something like that. Like it's pervasive now. There's damage reduction everywhere. And it doesn't only affect small arms, it affects like explosives, grenades start to feel inconsequential. Even some tanks, like some vehicles, start to feel like they don't do any damage anymore because of the stacking damage reduction values on infantry units. So all of this contributes to blobbing, which I started with, but I kind of started talking about the survivability stacking impact. Some other things that are contributing to blobbing is model caps, limiting impact of explosives. And as a reminder, everybody, the way model caps work is they're limited on a per squad basis, not a net total. So it's not like, you know, if I land an artillery shell in a big group of guys, I'm only going to hit 4 of them. if there's a big blob. It's 4 out of the squad, out of the total number of units per squad. So I hit 4 guys per squad. Generally speaking, most artillery units, they do about four models of area of effect damage. Tanks also do this. Some grenades do 4. There are exceptions to this, but it is in the majority. Like 4 is like probably the most consistent number that we see. So there's model caps, I think impacting potential explosive damage. And the way that this plays into the game, largely, is that because a combination of the survivability stacking, the area of effect impact, it's much more valuable for me to just be able to protect my own units by blobbing them together than flanking. Because the benefits of flanking are pretty inconsequential if your opponent isn't using cover. And generally, between all of the survivability bonuses that we talked about, the benefits of flanking are inconsequential whether you use cover or not, because units become so durable, they don't need cover anymore. And because you don't need cover, there's no reason to flank. And if there's no reason to flank, you may as well just use your army in one big group. And this has been a problem for a long time. It's actually a more pervasive problem with vehicles. Because vehicles have suffered from the same problem, which I'll talk about later on. I'll talk about vehicles and why it's a problem with them. But vehicles have been suffering from the problem of blobbing much longer than infantry has. It's only become more recently that a lot of the players in my games have started blobbing both their vehicles and their infantry, which just feels ridiculous to play. And you can kind of see it from Zizzy right now with his Panzer IVs. You know, Faragi getting punished over the course of this game for having his vehicles separated rather than together. The force concentration and force multiplier makes it much more dangerous to pursue kills when you have units that are close together versus separated, and you know, trying to attack from different angles and so forth. So cover not being decisive enough. This is mainly due to the survivability stacking that I was talking about earlier. The benefits of cover kind of just become too much of an opportunity cost. This is also true because of the way that explosive weapons perform in the game, which I've talked about pretty extensively at this point, how explosive weapons are different in 2 versus 3. That's the end of this game. I'm going to continue. Sorry, nerds. Carrying on from where we were. So, model caps limiting explosive impact. So, with model caps, I've seen a lot of people say like, well, why does model caps actually limit, or why does it impact blobbing? Because it's not like it restricts how many squads you're hitting with it, right? And that's true. That is true. However, model caps, the way that they're working right now, punishes small units much more than large units. I think the greatest example of this that I see in the game right now is like comparing the Kriegsmarine squad to virtually any other line unit. So pretty much every other line unit has more than 4 men. Most grenades, most explosive weapons, mortars, artillery units all have model caps of 4, meaning they can only deal damage to 4 men inside of a squad before they basically stop dealing damage to that squad specifically. Part of the reason this incentivizes blobbing more is because I have no reason to spread my units out. And if I eat an artillery shell, a grenade, whatever, the punishment is limited to however many models the cap is. So there's never going to be a situation where I'm risking like losing an entire squad. Most of the time, if it's a full squad of like grenadiers or riflemen or infantry section or whatever, by eating a grenade, then COH3, like you can't sit and eat a grenade with a squad and expect to survive if the grenade hits the entire squad, right? So the 6-man squads, like the larger squad sizes, really benefit from these caps where the smaller units don't. And that's where like one of the main weaknesses of Kriegsmarine squads is like they don't have any scaling to help them deal with explosive damage. So you lose them to, you know, stray grenades or tank shells or artillery shells all the time. And none of the other infantry units feel like that. If there wasn't caps on what kind of damage that you could take from artillery shells, from grenades, etc., there would be less incentive to blob units together because they would be dealing with collision, they would be dealing with clumping, and there's a much higher risk that you're going to take more damage from explosives if your units are together than if they're separated. But the reality is right now, if my unit takes explosive damage, it's never like a lethal risk. And so that creates all the incentive that I need, combined with the cover bonuses not being impactful enough, to focus on force and firepower concentration than positioning. And so you end up with dynamics with the, you know, I'm going to show you guys another example from one of my own games, in a 2v2 that I played against this particular Wehrmacht player. And you'll see it kind of unfold throughout the game. Like, it's, and there's other issues that compound this further. Another one is access to vision. And namely how that impacts the usage of machine guns. So at a high level, you know, because the players they have generally quicker reactions, generally good game knowledge. If they have access to lots of vision tools, it gives them the information that they need to avoid things like getting trapped by a machine gun or getting mass suppressed. And you layer on top of that the fact that specifically, like, basically any of the non-MG42 variants of machine guns do not deal enough suppression damage to meaningfully impact infantry blobs before they're able to counter. So that could be like, you know, I lob a smoke grenade, or I, you know, squeeze the rest of the squads out of the open ground, or the MG's firing arc. And of course, you know, once a machine gun has been flanked, it's completely useless. So the only way to fight blobs is with counter blobs, which is horrible, equally horrible to play as it is to play against. And there's just no way, you know, like yellow cover squad is going to pay off against. You look at this blob that I'm fighting, where he's. And this is another thing. So I'm not going to talk about this part too much because this is kind of an exclusively super high level problem. But you guys will notice, like, what he's doing is he's kind of like coming in, firing a volley with the grenadiers, and then backing away. And this limits the amount of damage that he's going to take from automatic weapons that deal more damage over time, like the BAR or like LMGs of any kind. Because he's breaking the engagement range before I can get off my full burst, and is therefore not going to take very much damage, right? So he's kind of he's just going to back away. He's going to fire a volley. He's going to back away, and he's going to do it again. He's just, you know, in between the cooldown of shots, and it's like, even though I had superior weapons, superior position with the yellow cover here, he's dealing a lot more damage to me than I could for him. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't, because he's got 3 squads here. But there should be more opportunities for me to counter where I don't necessarily have to commit 3 squads in the same way that this guy is in order to fight him, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at. So the volley firing, you know, kiting backwards thing is a little bit different, and I think something that they need to address. I think it actually has to do with aim time. Like if they made it so that when squads walked in, they actually had to take more time aiming before shooting at whatever their target is. There's multiple layers to this. Like there's also the fact that squads that are in cover have a specific animation that they have to go through before they start dealing damage, which exacerbates this problem I'm describing. You guys, if you didn't know I was a huge nerd about this game, you do now. So strap in, buckle in, you know, because we're going all the way into it. So yeah, you know, cover not being decisive enough, bonuses not mattering enough to compensate for the differences in, you know, force concentration. In summary, like the reason why blobbing is a problem, like players don't blob, and we saw this in the last game. Players don't blob because they are bad. They blob because it works. It is the best thing to do. It's the lowest risk, highest return, easiest to execute strategy in the game. And it's rewarded far more than engaging with the mechanics in the game, like cover, flanking, positioning, etc. And a lot of it has to do with the survivability stacking. The model caps and explosive impact is a big part of it as well. As well as some of the cover bonuses, I think, just like not really outweighing the stacking survivability in the way that it should. Now talking about model caps, we kind of talked about, you know, explosives kind of fail to punish unit density, create really inconsistent outcomes. I think this is one of the clearest mechanical contributors to blobbing being viable. And I'm not saying that they should do away with it completely. I know it's eliminated a lot of cases of like frustrating squad wipes, just kind of like, you know, losing a squad instantaneously to a stray artillery shell or tank shell or whatever. But for the record, that stuff still happens all the time. It just happens for some weapons and not for others. Good example is the King Tiger. I've seen the King Tiger one-shot plenty of squads. Happens all the time. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't, but it's like, it does that. So should we not see more, at least variance, or I guess access to that kind of lethality in other units besides the Tiger, besides the King Tiger, the Obiche, right? The Obiche howitzer is the only howitzer in any roster that has no model cap. It can wipe a 6-man, 7-man squad easily. No problem if it gets a direct hit. The other howitzers, maybe they shouldn't do exactly the same thing, but like maybe they should increase the model cap by 1 so that, you know, I'm not instantly killing a full health, full model squad, but maybe I'm dealing more significant damage to the squads that I am hitting, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at. Same is true of grenades, and this is also like, it's also exacerbated by team weapons. So team weapons, in a lot of cases, the team weapon itself, so the machine gun, the anti-tank gun, it also counts toward the model capacity, which is, I don't know if it's a bug, if it's a feature. It's certainly not been communicated that it's an intended feature. But the machine gun or the AT gun counts towards the model capacity. So this is why when you guys throw grenades on machine guns, for example, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna hit the whole squad is inside the grenade radius, and then it survives with 1 man. The reason why is because the machine gun itself is absorbing some of the damage from the grenade because of the model capacity, and it being, you know, 4 units instead of 5, for example. So even doing something as simple as like increasing the model cap by 1, I think would go a long way. in making some of the explosives and like usage of explosive weapons a little bit more punishing. The beach has 5 model cap according to Tightrope. Okay, well I would believe that actually. That would make sense. But I feel like I've seen it kill like full units before, but I could be wrong. Moving on to vehicles. So I think another one of the big problems is related to vehicles. In my opinion, there's a combination of problems between the cost, the spam, and the phasing of vehicles. So in my opinion, vehicles generally feel too easy to mass, too forgiving to lose, too mobile in groups. And then if you combine this with like the pathing and the phasing issues, as well as the strength of repair, it creates a death ball dynamic rather than controlled armored play. So categorically, in this game compared to Company of Heroes 2, vehicles are less expensive. And originally, it made a lot of sense to me because they were trying to cut down the average time of games. And so in order to make it so that your players can access the entire roster of vehicles, you probably need to bring down the cost, or you need to bump up the economic values of points on the map. And it seems to me like they went for the latter, where they went for cheaper vehicles instead. But the problem with this is that vehicles, a lot of vehicles, especially the light ones early on, they don't feel very impactful to lose. You can usually replace them without like really significant impact to your map control, or to your, you know, your long game, your late game. You're not paying the price for getting a second, or even in some cases a third light vehicle, because in this game the economic system provides a lot more incentives towards map control and momentum than the previous titles. And that's built into the economic points themselves. Like in COH3, there was much more emphasis on net map control than specific points. And I still haven't decided whether I like this or hate this. But like in 3, we've got these like high fuel points, or just fuel points in general, compared to 2, where we had a distribution of, you're getting both resources per point on the map. And then there were some high points that were worth like, it was like a double plus a little bit extra of that specific resource. Like in the case of fuel, for example, standard points were 3, but a high fuel point was 7. So it's like double plus 1. Munitions, I think, was similar, where it was like a munitions point would be like 16, if I'm not mistaken, where it's like, maybe it was 11. I think it was 11 actually, because a standard munitions point was 5, and so by the same logic, it would have been 11. But it creates these bottlenecks on the map where it's like all the attention goes there, rather than dispersing it across the whole map and thinking about net map control. Because fuel is so much more important in this game, due to obviously tech requirements, tech needs, and the fuel cost of vehicles, and munitions really only being allocated to abilities, and some abilities, I would argue mostly battle group abilities, and weapon upgrades. There's a lot less of an emphasis on a need for munitions in the early and mid game than there probably should be, because again, fuel being so much more important, and players still being able to execute all kinds of abilities and maneuvers without munitions. Good example, like, you know, all these abilities in a previous title probably would have cost munitions, but in this game they're free. They have no munitions cost, and so I can use them all the time, whether I have munitions or not. And so I think that dynamic, it creates a power disparity between the focus on fuel versus the focus on munitions. And it would be really nice to see a little bit more distribution on the map, a little bit more. I would honestly sooner see them probably revert to the previous economic system from COH3, where it's like most of the points on the map are strategic points and they provide both resource types, and that you still have your high points, but there's not such a dramatic swing in income from one side to the other. Because I think it exacerbates some of these problems. And again, like I've had plenty of games where I have an opponent who will continuously churn out light vehicles to hold control of a fuel point and still come out ahead in tech because I'm unable to capitalize on killing the first one, for example. Categorically, I think, and especially if we're taking into account what I was talking about earlier, if they peel back some of the survivability stacking and make the infantry less durable, it will, by proxy, increase the effectiveness of vehicles. And that, in my opinion, justifies a cost increase on those vehicles, where the vehicles are going to be more effective, they're going to be more valuable because they're going to be able to kill infantry easier. And so as a result, you should probably have to pay more for them, and they should be more punishing if you do lose them, like previous titles was. We layer on top of this like vehicle phasing. It's very easy to use vehicles in groups because they can phase through each other. Friendly vehicles specifically can phase through each other. They actually helped and fixed the ability for you to use units to block opponents' units. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than it was. And now it's much more possible to use, friendly units to block. It's blob, man. Friendly units to block enemy units, which was not possible in previous patches, I should say, for this game. So that's a good thing, but it's still too easy to maneuver all of your vehicles in one control group. And we've been seeing the blobbing of vehicles for much longer than I've been seeing the blobbing of infantry. And I think like the armor system only exacerbates this. So I just want to pause and talk about the armor system really quick. Specifically, I'm actually gonna. So the way the armor works in this game is you have the front, the side, and the rear. And the way that the calculation is made between front, side, and rear is entirely dependent on where the projectile impacts the vehicle, but not the angle by which the projectile is hitting the vehicle. So as an example, like, on any larger tank or larger vehicle, the side armor is more susceptible to enemy projectiles, but if the projectile is hitting me at like a 15-degree angle, it increases the relative effectiveness of the thickness of the side armor in real life, right? In real life. So if a shell hits a tank on the side at 15-degree angle, there's a really good chance that it's just going to ricochet off, because the effective thickness of the armor is much higher than if the shell comes in perpendicular to the vehicle. In this game, every projectile is treated like it's coming in at a perpendicular angle. And because the side surfaces of vehicles are so large relative to the front, you're almost never getting the impact of the frontal armor from your vehicle. It's very easy to access the side armor on vehicles. And this exacerbates the blobbing problem because there's never any reason for me to separate my vehicles from each other, because whether I'm coming at an enemy vehicle from the front or from this angle, I'm still going to hit it in the side armor either way. So there's no point in me taking the risk of separating my forces and keeping them from being in position to protect each other, when I could just keep them all together and get the same damage benefits against the enemy vehicle that I'm trying to deal damage to, right? So So the armor system is a big problem because, again, it doesn't take into account the angle by which the projectile is coming from. It only takes into account what surface of the vehicle it's hitting. And I think the way to solve this problem is probably to create it so that the frontal armor sort of wraps around the vehicle. Maybe like the first 33%, the first third of the vehicle actually counts as frontal armor. So like these surfaces on the corners. So that if you're taking projectiles from the front on a sharp angle, you're actually getting the frontal armor value rather than the side. Now, technically, how possible that is, I have no idea. But to me, that is the obvious solution to the problem of armor blobbing. And then we'll talk about repair. Like, repair power in this game is dramatically better than either of the previous titles for a few reasons. One, because repair effectiveness is not tied to how many models are in a squad. So, as an example, here a second, pull this part of my notes. So, with the repair mechanics, I have two major concerns. One is the repair rate not scaling with a squad model. This reduces the attrition impact of losing guys in your squad, affecting their ability to repair. So, like, if I go into a big tank battle with an opponent and he's got engineer units that are part of that, maybe they're carrying a minesweeper or whatever else, and I manage to chip away at that squad but not chase it off the field completely, regardless of how many models are in the squad or the health of the squad, the effectiveness of repairs remains the same. And in previous titles, this was not the case. In COH3, and I believe in COH1 as well, your repair effectiveness scaled completely with how many models were in the squad still. So you're not going to get full repair effectiveness from a squad who's lost like 2 guys, as an example, 2 out of 4, 2 out of 3. And I just don't think that should be the case. It mitigates the attrition value. You know, maybe I'm directly focusing on trying to kill my opponent's engineer to limit his repair effectiveness, but I can't do that. So that's one problem. You also have repairing on the move, which reduces punish windows. You know, my vehicle takes engine damage, like I can be reversing back to base and repairing it at the same time because my engineer can keep up with the vehicle that's reversing as it's reversing to safety, as opposed to having to wait until it's completely reversed to safety. And this even breaks combat dynamics where, like, there are tanks that can be repaired in combat and they get a little bit of extra health from an engineer and it turns the engagement completely around. Which doesn't make sense. Like, it's completely broken. And I've seen a lot of cases where, like, players will sacrifice cheap engineer units, even though they're taking extra damage, just for that little bit of extra health so they can win the vehicle engagement. It's just really, really frustrating. So I don't think units should be able to repair on the move at all, for sure. And then you layer on top of that, like, in this game we have lots of area of effect repair abilities, or out of combat idle repair abilities for the DAC, as an example. Repair stations as well. Like, they all contribute to the uptime of vehicles. And, you know, when you take casualties on an infantry squad, you literally have to pay resources for it. But when you take damage on vehicles, the only resource that you're typically paying is time. And it's so easy to recoup because of all these factors I just talked about, where you've got, you know, full repair effectiveness of squads that have taken damage. You've got the ability for squads to repair on the move. You've got abilities that allow units to repair out of combat anywhere on the map, or they get area of effect repairs. It's just too much. Like, it just makes again, it exacerbates and encourages the blobbing of vehicles. Because not only can they protect each other, but they can also, like, group, you know, go and bundle into a a small confined area and all get repairs simultaneously. There's just no incentive to separate my vehicles anymore. And so it hurts the positional gameplay elements, which is disappointing. So, repair mechanics again seem like the change they made in service of faster game pace. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's fair, but I do think it creates like a pretty significant imbalance between the vehicle gameplay and the infantry gameplay, because the infantry gameplay doesn't have the same benefits. Where, you know, I think the vehicles are affected more so than the infantry in terms of their uptime due to all the changes that they made. So I think if they made vehicles more expensive, we wouldn't see as many of them, but they would be, you know, they would still be impactful, especially if you truncate the survivability infantry. And we might get some more interesting positional gameplay if they can do something about the armor distribution across vehicles. I don't know. But even just like less vehicles on the map, like I'm so tired of a lot of games devolving into like 3 or 4 of one kind of tank, bumping into 3 or 4 of another kind of tank, and they're just, you know, they're all together. Nobody's really considering, you know, coming in from a different angle or splitting their forces or doing anything like that we are used to seeing in like COH3, because their armor system was different, I should say. And it was a lot harder to penetrate vehicles consistently because they didn't have side armor. They only had front and back. So it's it needs some work, I think. The armor system. I think they could increase the cost of vehicles so that they're more punishing to lose. I think they could reduce the effectiveness of the area of effect repairs, namely the basically like the free repairs, where you don't actually have to spend the time of an engineer to do it. In addition, you know, we could like make it so that the vehicles bump into each other more if they're being clumped or blobbed in a group, to again incentivize players to separate them, to spread them out. Maybe use them in 2 groups instead of 1, like that kind of thing. I think it would make a big difference. And I would really like to see them change that. Moving along to costless or low cost abilities. And I think this is related largely to the fuel versus munitions imbalance I was talking about earlier. So, generally speaking, and this comes up a lot when I'm talking to players that I'm giving coaching to, I say like the person who controls the fuel generally controls the tempo of the game. And I think that's a fine dynamic, generally speaking, but it's like such a dramatic disparity in terms of priority between munitions and fuel in the early and mid game. Like, fuel is just so much more important than munitions. It feels like munitions is kind of just there until the late game. And then interestingly, the dynamic kind of switches in the late game, where it's like the person who has stockpiled the most munitions actually has the most power, because they've got these big win buttons that they have access to that are late in the battle groups that they use. But yeah, fuel dictates early pacing, munitions float accumulates for late game, and there's a lot of spammable free abilities where engagements are decided by ability throughput instead of battlefield setup. And this is a big problem. The best example I can use of this oftentimes is like when I am playing with a rifleman squad from green cover, an enemy Panzer Grenadier just runs straight into me. And they've taken a lot of damage on the approach. But when they get into me, they trigger the automatic fire ability, which is free, and they get ramping damage bonuses. So they get huge rate of fire bonuses that ramp up over time, that completely mitigate my superior positioning in that engagement, simply because my opponent pressed a button. And that feels, again, we talk about the effectiveness of cover, like that feels completely terrible on the receiving end. It feels like, you know, I was really intentional about making sure that, you know, maybe I even knew it was coming, the Panzer Grenadier. Maybe I knew it was coming. And I took superior cover position. I engaged it from an appropriate distance, from the maximum distance that I could. And he was still able to just walk into me and press a button and win the engagement. That feels terrible. If they layered in even just a really low munitions cost for some of these abilities, it's like, okay, maybe my opponent can just run into me and press a button, but if they at least had to pay for the ability, then it's not a complete loss for me on the receiving end, right? Because yeah, it's like, okay, my opponent doesn't have access to that ability for what, 2 more minutes or something, but like they're getting the free map control and there's no economic impact to my opponent for doing that. And if it were different, like, you know, if the player had to pay 10 munitions and then they were doing that, you know, every single engagement with their Panzer Grenadiers, it's like, okay, actually now, like, first of all, munitions becomes way more important, because without munitions, I can't continuously trigger these abilities that are going to allow me to win engagements where I had inferior positioning. That's the first part. The second part is like, now, you know, because of this new dynamic where it's like, I'm going to be focusing on accumulating munitions, it opens up more possibilities for me to snowball that into other kinds of control. And now it creates a much more interesting dynamic between, do I want to focus on munitions so I can spam all my abilities on my infantry, my vehicles, and all this stuff? Or do I want to focus on fuel so that I can get fast access to tech and to vehicles and, you know, whatever else? If the abilities had just a low cost that it's like not, you know, completely economically irrelevant on whether or not I use them, then I think we would see a much more interesting impact on the economic focus of games between fuel and munitions. Because right now it's always fuel. Fuel is king, fuel is paramount. Fuel is really the only thing that matters in like the early and mid game. Munitions is there, but it's just like the level of impact is just not even close. And this would change that pretty significantly. This would also alleviate the crazy late game munitions floats that accumulate, where these late game super powerful abilities become really spammable because players aren't spending their munitions on anything else. And part of this is skill issue, like players could always be spending their munitions on building mines, upgrading things, whatever. But like, there are times where it gets to the late game where it's like, players are using their late game abilities on cooldown because they just don't have anything else meaningful enough to spend their munitions on. And to me, that feels like a really disparaging dynamic as well. All of this creates a less interactive and less skill expressive environment where, you know, the games are eventually, in the early game, it's basically like, you know, whoever has a button available is winner of the engagement, regardless of positioning. Again, we talked about the effectiveness of cover. This is another thing that kind of like exacerbates that problem, that, you know, in making people feel like cover doesn't really matter. And then you layer on top of it, like, you get these late game abilities that you can just spam, and it generally becomes like, okay, whoever's got more buttons to press wins the engagement, which by proxy eventually wins the game, right? And positioning, you know, unit concentration generally matters, but like positioning, it kind of falls by the wayside. And it's positioning and like use of cover and line of sight and all this other stuff, like it all becomes completely secondary to whoever has the big win button, big ability that is going to swing the engagement in my favor. And I'm not saying that those abilities shouldn't be impactful, but should they be the deciding factor in every fight? Probably not. No, probably not. They should just be another layer of strategic expression where it's like, okay, this is going to make a difference, but it's not going to be everything. It's still going to be how, you know, how are my units positioned? Am I attacking from the appropriate angle? Am I using all of the tactics or all of the abilities that I need to? Do I have the correct composition to deal with my opponent, or am I just, you know, stockpiling one type of unit? Like, I think all of those other factors should matter a lot more than they do, especially in the late game. And right now they just they really don't. Moving on. So we talked about this a little bit already, but like cover doesn't seem to make a difference enough. And touched on this in a lot of other different categories, namely like the infantry survivability makes a huge difference as well. But, you know, between like the core points of this is that poor positioning is not punished hard enough. There are no negative cover dynamics like there was in 2. And, you know, I'm hoping this will be covered. And look at this guy. Just eats the nade because he's, you know, too busy focusing on his other control group. But yeah, there's a lot of cases where blobs can just like brute force through engagements in cover. And the compounding factors are the received accuracy scaling, the health pools, damage reduction interactions. The outcome is that positioning feels secondary, completely secondary, to mass and timing, generally speaking. And again, exacerbated by, you know, when you start to blob infantry units together, it just makes the dynamic compoundingly worse.
Roger that. We won't reinforce without your word.
Talked about infantry versus vehicles, economic emphasis on fuel, repair mechanics. That's kind of the last thing, but I think like team weapons not really taking meaningful damage outside of decrew. Maybe this is a preference thing, but it's always kind of bothered me that like you can only kill a team weapon after it's been completely decrewed, and the team weapons themselves don't require any kind of like maintenance. They don't need to be repaired while they're crewed. The model caps also contributing pretty significantly to team weapon survivability, as well as stacking damage reduction bonuses in some cases, or health bonuses that that units get. All this stuff makes the team weapons feel really annoying to interact with. Namely, I'd say the model caps is like one of the biggest things for me, because it's really unrewarding in a lot of cases to like hit an AT gun with a grenade, or artillery shell, you know, hits an AT gun on its head, and it creates these dynamics where it's like, in order to get effectiveness from artillery, for example, you need like 2 or 3 units of artillery to get the outcome that you're looking for. And if we were talking about earlier, you know, we talked about like making vehicles more expensive, for example. I would apply that to SPGs as well, because if infantry is made less survivable, then SPGs will go up in terms of their effectiveness. They'll be effective against infantry, and so that'll make it, you know, so that there's more payoff for having 1 artillery unit instead of needing to build 2 or more, which is pretty frustrating, having to build 2 or more of the same unit just to get the effectiveness that you're really hoping for to get from 1. Anyway, so that's kind of the gist of, like, from my perspective, those are like the main problems that we're seeing. And again, from my perspective, it seems like Relic has at this point decided, like, okay, this must be how they want the game to be, because they haven't changed it. They haven't changed this stuff. It's still like core. And the problems have always existed. They've existed since the game was released in the first place. They've never really changed. So I would have liked to see them change. Look at this nice repair and combat, saving this guy from death. That feels really good. Great, great dynamic, great ability. But yeah, so you know, a lot of my games looking a lot like, here, I'll go over to this guy now. You know, looking like this guy, just like building a big blob of infantry, not able to, you know, punish him with machine guns or with artillery in an impactful way. It's kind of just like killing my interest in I really want to make interesting battle group videos, and you know, I want to make I want to make guides for people, but it's been really hard for me because a lot of my games look like these. I'll show you guys another one in like 8x here. It just like, it just feels silly. Like, it feels so not arbitrary, but like the stuff that I'm talking about feels so secondary to what you would be seeing on screen from my opponents a lot of the times, which is just like, we just kind of just blob. We just smash our big groups of units into each other, and you know, it just makes everything about positioning and all the stuff that I'm used to talking about. And again, it's not a completely new thing. It's just that this kind of gameplay has become pervasive now, to the point where, like, I used to get games with players that would play like this a few times out of a long session, maybe like 1 or 2 games out of a 8 or 10 game session, which is usually what I'm doing when I'm streaming, to like more than 50%, like 60%, 70%. And it's become to the point where, like, players that didn't used to play this way are starting to, because they care about winning, right? And the positional stuff, everything else becomes secondary, becomes kind of inconsequential to unit concentration and blobbing. Vehicles and infantry alike, it just doesn't feel good. So that's kind of my rant, or I think what's going on in the game. There's also, you know, the current patch that we're on, and the current state of balance is also not really exciting. I think Relic really cooked Axis hard on this most recent patch, and take that from somebody who plays every faction completely equally, and I enjoy every faction pretty much equally. I have almost the same number of games on every faction. For somebody who has, you know, 8,000 or so games now, it's like, I feel like I have a pretty good intuition on what's strong and what's weak. And it's the gameplay for Axis has become pretty one-dimensional at this point. Planes are too strong. That's another thing. Like, I wasn't gonna talk about it in this video, but I've still got you guys here. Like, the changes that they made to AA were so bad, because the idea was interesting, but the execution was poor. And the reason the execution was poor is because they introduced a micro tax, which I thought was interesting, but there's no payoff. Like, now I have to micro my AA unit to target aircraft, and it goes into stationary mode and all this stuff, but it doesn't actually kill the aircraft before they deliver the payload. Like, what is the point of that? If you introduce a micro tactic, or a micro tax, I should say, then you should probably give some kind of payoff for that tax to the players. It's very, very strange decision. So what I think they need to do is keep this dynamic, but double the damage of anti-aircraft weapons when they're in this stance. Very simple. Double the damage of anti-aircraft weapons that are in the AA stance. That way, we can effectively shoot down planes. Players are actually rewarded for engaging with the mechanic that Relic created. And you could even do something like add a cooldown so that the player who's using aircraft can look for those windows and try to, you know, bait their opponent into using the AA mode. So that they have a window of opportunity to call in their planes or whatever. But it's just like they completely broke this dynamic because they wanted to give opportunity to players to use ASC, which in my opinion was actually just a poorly designed support center from the jump. And they're kind of just shoehorning it in by making AA terrible. So poor design decision. Probably need a tracking boost too. Yeah, like you mean like rotation rate, I'm assuming. Which I always thought it was weird that they removed. I mean, I get why they removed the tracking bonus because people were going into AA mode and then using the 88 for like super giga rotation speed. But they've pretty much got rid of that now because it's a target aircraft only, so they could probably give it back to the units and let them properly track and target aircraft in ways that they weren't before. But yeah, it's basically, I mean, it's like, you know, my opponent is just doing a lot of... He's got 3 control groups, you know, he's got the PGs, he's got the Black Veerling, this guy, what about this guy? He's got not a lot of infantry either. Just a lot of running around in open ground, running through things. You know the interesting thing? So we talked about received accuracy bonuses. I actually think like a lot of it is tied to the infantry combat dynamics are actually so good at Vet 0. When every single unit is at Vet 0, the infantry combat feels exactly like it should. Cover makes a huge difference in combat. Range makes a huge difference. But as the units start to scale up and get their bonuses, their veterancy rewards, it just totally breaks down. And it turns into this. Which kind of hard to watch, I'm sure, for you guys on 8X and see the dynamic, but it's just a lot of just group, move, group, you know, group around, move together, right click, ignore cover, close the gap. And it's a shame. It's a shame. And I think they can fix it. I think it's fixable. But it obviously wouldn't be a small amount of work, you know? Like, these guys just forget about cover. There we go. Now we're finally in cover. That's good. Finally got into cover. It's great. So, in short, I'm still going to make videos. I'm going to overview the next... By the way, the next trailer that they made for the new battle groups, just the best trailer they've ever made for this game by far. Whoever made that needs a raise. That was just incredible. Really nice blob there, killing my rifleman on retreat feels good. Again, if I had just been blobbing my rifleman the whole time, I probably would have a much safer retreat path. Because I'm trying to use them a little bit more separately, independently, until I get to the point where it's like, okay, this is what my opponent is doing, so I also have to do this. To feel like I have no other options, it's not great. But yeah, the trailer they released is exceptional. The new battle groups look pretty cool. I'll break down the trailer video next. I will be doing a tier list as well, because we'll probably be on this patch until the new one in May, I think, is the release of the new battle group. So I don't think we're going to get anything between now and then. So I'll do another tier list for you guys. Just a little spoiler for you. I'd say, you know, the Axis battle groups are generally going to sit lower than the Allies ones because it's just a rough patch for Axis. And, well, this is a very mighty satchel there. It's just too bad I couldn't pick up the Panzerschreck. For some reason, I couldn't get the angle on it. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I don't know if I'm going to do battle group videos anytime soon just because of, you know, everything I was describing to you guys. It's hard for me to break down games. Might just keep it to, you know, going into cheat mode and explaining mechanics and doing things that way. But yeah, in the meantime, I'm just trying to play more and try to get some decent games in. Maybe if you guys are still interested or you find this stuff interesting, maybe I'll still get like closer games against opponents. I've been playing a lot more 2v2s because I find the blobbing is a little bit more counterable because the map is truncated, and so I can focus my forces together. I can build units that I wouldn't otherwise usually build in a 1v1 because the opportunity cost is too high, like artillery units, for example. And frankly, a lot more of the good players are playing 2s right now instead of 1s because everybody hates playing 1s. So, and hard to blame them on circumstances. But yeah, that's where we're at. So still gonna do coaching. Coaching's gonna continue. I am optimistic because, like I said, like, you know, that first game that I showed you guys with Ferigi, like, he is part of that team now. He obviously knows the problems with the game. I think it's just a question now of just like getting the resources and getting the buy-in from the rest of the team to be like, okay, guys, we actually have to fix these problems because the players are, you know, having problems because these problems in the game still exist. And, you know, if it impacts their sales, like, that's going to make a difference too. So, oh yeah, this guy diving deep, too deep, and letting his Hellcat get salvaged feels good. This is unfortunate. And I just had to spam tank destroyers because every time we lost something deep in their territory, it was getting recovered by this guy. He's got recovery on his engineers. So this was rough. Interesting crescendo at the end. Chat. Yeah, no one's playing this game anymore. Yeah, it kind of feels that way, or it's getting to that point at least. But I don't know. Hopefully they can turn it around, because it's been getting less and less fun over time. Guy eats the grenade and gets away. That was so sad. Catch out the A move double AT guns. Haha. Finish them off though because they're mortal until they get recrewed. Decrewed, I should say. Dizzy and Zooman are the only ones. Yeah, I play against them probably about 60% of the time now. There's hardly any more opponents. So this guy. Yeah, the stacking bonuses are really rough. This is the part where we get easy fix region lock. Yeah, then we'll play against nobody. It's not a great idea. We'll have no opponents. I won't even play against the Chinese players anymore. I'll just have nobody. There'll be nobody to play against anymore. Tragic. Overextended the bulldozer, but had no choice there. We're kicking out of VPs. We're just gonna right click all our vehicles, gonna drive together. Not terrible, but yeah, don't love the blobbing of the vehicles. The wrecks really help, the wrecks change, but it's still just, you know, bashing blobs into each other. It just doesn't feel good. Anyway, that's my rant. I hope you guys can understand. And like I said, I'll still be making videos, but until some of this core stuff is going to be fixed, I mean, it's going to be hard for me to do the other stuff. And frankly, like, I really want to see the competitive run for this game that we had for Company Heroes 2. And until they fix these issues, I don't think we're going to see that. So that's the other reason I really hope that we get it, get some of the changes that I was talking about. But yeah, I'm curious, like, you know, beyond what I talked about, beyond tier lists, beyond the coaching stuff, I actually haven't been publishing, but I'm still doing quite a bit of that. So if you guys are really interested in seeing more coaching videos, maybe I'll start publishing those again. and obviously breakdowns of the stuff that Relic is releasing. But I'd be keen to see what else you guys would like to see from me. But yeah, the guides for now, they've just been hard for me to make, and I've pretty much explained myself as to why. And we're just hoping they make the changes, but we'll see. We'll see. We can only hope. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree. I'd really like to see some contrary opinions. If you guys feel like I'm off base and you feel like the game's in a great state, I'd like to hear why. Because obviously I only have the echo chamber of my small community and the people that I talk to. And generally we all agree about this stuff, but obviously I recognize there's lots of people that I probably don't interact with that have differing opinions, so I'd like to hear those too. So maybe leave those in the comments, and I'll catch you nerds on the next one. See ya.